Hi.
Hello, Shan. Good afternoon.
Hi.
Hello from all
Hello.
over. Good to see your faces and your smiles. Okay, we're just going to give everybody one more minute to join. And Bernard, we haven't seen your face for so long. Wonderful to see you. Okay, so okay. Or maybe just...
Andre, muting and starting video.
Bernard?
Hi, hi, Bernard. Good to see you.
Hi, Andre.
Okay, I have to go
Do
in
you
your
hear me?
settings.
We can hear you.
Okay. Is it not difficult because I'm in the car?
No.
It's not too noisy?
No, it's
Perfect.
working
No.
fine. What we normally do is we ask everybody to put themselves on mute until they speak, because then it makes it much easier for everybody to have a good recording.
Yeah.
So if everybody can mute yourselves until you want to speak, then just unmute yourself and
Okay.
then speak. That will work well.
So I have to unmute now, or what?
Let me, I think I've just done it for you. And then whenever you want to, we're going to talk a little bit, but then there's going to be a space for participation quite soon. And at that stage, you just unmute yourself and we can converse further from there. Ah, look at that beautiful group there.
Yeah. Annulas and the puppies.
Hey. Okay, I think we're all there.
Okay. And yeah, it's just so wonderful to see all your beautiful faces, and as it's our first time getting together as the whole, maybe just an introduction of why we doing this, and having traveled to so many different places. And sorry, we've just got a call coming through from South Africa at the same time. Let's just
our daughter, whose birthday it is.
We're having a lot of eventful times, as many of you know. We have just said welcome to our beautiful grandson, and as many of you know, we've been waiting, anticipating, and the little guy was 2 weeks or so overdue, and but he is just gorgeous. So we welcomed, sorry, I'm also trying to let people in. We welcomed Lennon William Rabe into the world, and he is just absolutely gorgeous, delightful, and our hearts are just swelling. I mustn't get emotional. And yeah, so let's get back to the call. And so the reason why we wanted to do this is traveling, to so many different places, so many different groups, meeting so many that are disillusioned with, the usual institutional churches that they've been in, haven't felt like they had a safe environment to honestly question and grow. And many have felt the need for fellowship, but the question has always arisen, how do we do this? In this new understanding, how do we create community? And so we decided we wanted to do this and create this group. And what is different about this online group? We hope, and this is what we have put in place to give this a focus, that this is a focused group where there'll be recommended books, where we're gathering kind of on the same page, and the added a bit of, we have our online school. So students from the online school are gathering in this meeting as well. And which is just so wonderful to have that. And yeah, and just a place of just honesty and where you can share your heart, where you can feel safe, where you can glean from one another. And our hope for this as well, the second thing is that we're doing this bi-weekly. And so the suggestion would be, if you've been sitting and thinking, how can I create community in a focused way? How can I do this? We would hope that every second week that we're not doing a call, that you would gather your group, just invite people around, and that this could be a focused way in which you could involve them in this conversation physically, having people around. And so that is what our hope is with this. And anything you wanted to add to that?
So many of you probably have done some of the courses online. Many of you are maybe totally new to, for instance, Gerardian ideas or thinking. And so sometimes it might feel that you've thrown into the deep end of a conversation, and that's
already happening.
Yeah, that's good. That's the way we grow. We're being stretched. So just allow yourself to relax and find your own pace within this conversation. And also concerning, you might not have any desire to have a physical fellowship in between. There's no obligation or expectation that happens. It's just that we've spoken to a lot of people who have that desire to start a fellowship. And this is kind of just a support and to help to say, maybe this is the last little push you need to do it, knowing that there's a group every 2 weeks that will facilitate or be a catalyst to the conversations that you want to have with your group on a weekly basis. So that's the idea behind the group. And what I want to maybe do now, before we just jump into a conversation, is to introduce the initial theme or focus that we're going to be conversing around for the next maybe 6 months. And because most of our online students, they've been doing already 1 month of studying mimetic theory, I'm going to give a quick introduction to that theme. Then we'll give some recommended books, and then we're going to open it up to conversation after that. So the focus with René Girard and mimetic theory, why have we chosen that idea? And maybe let me give this introduction. I think the ultimate goal or aim of where we're heading for this 6 months is to give you tools by which you can create meaning in your life story. So all of us are busy creating meaning. From the moment we enter this world, we enter into this dynamic movement where we're trying to make sense of what is happening. And at the early stage, in early child development, there's actually a beautiful book called The Evolving Self by Kegan. Kegan is the surname of the psychologist that wrote this book. And, at the early stage of children's development, there's very little self-consciousness. I'm sure you told them we've got our first
Yes.
rescue. And it's wonderful to see this little one. Newborns are so amazed at the wonders that surround them, but there's very little self-awareness. I think that idea comes across in the book of Genesis as well, when it says they were both naked but unashamed. There's an awareness, but it's not the full consciousness that adults have. You've got to develop into that full self-awareness. And part of that development is that we begin to make sense of our experiences. Every new experience is met with a multitude of suggestions of meaning. And so the unconscious suggestions of meaning, the imagination is much more active at that young age before rational thought comes to the fore. Rationality begins to develop when the child realizes that there are benefits to correctly interpreting my world. Now, we can interpret our world and give meaning to it, but not all our interpretations are correct. And if we misinterpret our experiences, there can be painful consequences. And so young children continually reorientate themselves around the newly discovered facts of their world. And they soon learn that, sometimes it takes a while, but banging your hand with something heavy has consequences. So we kind of develop a framework, don't do that. And we develop other frameworks that if I do this, there are rewards. And so the most natural way of ordering our experiences is sequentially. And so naturally we develop a framework that has got a narrative structure to it. There's a sequence, there's a flow. Life happens in a way. Certain actions have got certain consequences. And that framework of interpretation becomes more and more important. I think it's at the age of 11, you can consult that book or I can look at it again, but there's a certain stage within young children's development where they start realizing my fantasies and my imaginations are too childlike, and they become a little bit more ashamed of the fantasies, and they enter into a greater rationality to say, no, this is the way it works. That was just the imagination. And so that search for certainty and for clarity is a natural development, a natural progression within our development. Now, what does it have to do with us? Because most of us have forgotten our early childhood. I think that that search for certainty is something that survives well into adulthood. We kind of still want there's a lure about certainty, and as well the frameworks we develop at the early age can become very rigid, and sometimes we need some help to redevelop that framework. As believers and as people within a faith community, many of us incorporate a meta-narrative. And what I mean by that, maybe most of you will identify with this, but the Bible becomes a major part of the story with which we interpret our own lives. Can you identify with that? That this is the biggest story that tells us where we come from and where we're going. And it helps us make sense of where we find ourselves in this moment. Now, this is where René Girard has played an enormously significant role in our lives and in the lives of many others, is in a sense, he has given us a story. Now, please don't just be offended, but kind of hear how I complete this picture. But he gave us a story that is, in a sense, larger than the biblical story. He gave us a meta-narrative with which to interpret the scriptures. Now, I don't think the content of the story is larger. What I mean by that is that the Bible was being written, maybe some think a few hundred years, some maybe 1,000 years before Christ was where the first text started coming together. A lot of it was written, obviously the New Testament after Christ. And so in terms of that lifespan of when the biblical scriptures were written, we're looking at the story that began approximately 1,000 years before Christ and a few hundred years after. Now, obviously, the story itself explores ideas that are much older, and much of what is written in it was some of it was taken from oral myths and stories that was older than the written account we have. But in that sense, we can kind of locate the development of thought within the scriptures to about 1,000 years before Christ to 300 years after Christ. That is where we can locate that development of the narrative. Now, what René Girard started doing in his anthropological questions is to say, where did this ability to tell stories begin? Where did symbolic thought begin? So he asks anthropological stories. Anthropology deals with the history of human development. So he's not only interested in imagining human history, but he's interested in what are the processes that made us human. Now, that's a big question. And when he started looking at many of the other myths, before he even looked at the Bible, he started looking at other origin stories. And that's a fascinating area, because once you understand that there were many, many versions of the stories that we, for instance, find in Genesis, and you start seeing both the similarities and the differences, then you begin to appreciate that people have struggled with the same questions and the same ideas for a long time. And, the biblical writers had a specific focus, and they developed that thought further within the scriptures. But the biblical stories didn't just fall out of nowhere. They were in development for many ages and generations before they actually found their form within the Bible. So the main idea I wanted to give across there is that this title, mimetic theory, or the Girardian anthropology, gives us a larger context in which we can now reread the scriptures. And for us, that has been, and for many of you, that has been a very enriching experience. Despite the fact that it might be very difficult to let go of certain ideas and very challenging in other aspects, it doesn't just deconstruct, but it also offers us an opportunity for new meaning and deeper insight into who and what we are. So there is a hermeneutical aspect. Hermeneutics has got to do with our interpretation of text. And for most of you, that will be our interpretation of the scriptures. And that is one aspect where Gerard offers a lot of help. And I'm going to try now, within 3 to 5 minutes, to give a quick summary of mimetic theory. And obviously, because I'm going to do it in 3 minutes, in 3 or 4 minutes, I'm going to leave out 99% of it. And then we're going to open it up to conversation. And I would actually love some of the students also to chip in and give their own summary of mimetic theory. So I found it useful to divide this anthropological story, the story of what makes us human, into 3 categories. The first category I call mimesis, and that is our ability to reflect, our ability to see into the interior of another and duplicate the feelings within ourselves. Now, for René Girard, mimetic desire, this mimetic ability has got mainly to do with desire, that humans reflect the desires of others, and they do it mainly unconsciously. So that's why he chose the word mimesis. Mimesis, really, if you hear the word, you can substitute it with the word imitate. They have the same etymological origins. But he chose the word mimesis because he thought the word imitate has got too many conscious connotations to it. And he wanted to emphasize this unconscious movement, this way in which desires arise within us and we don't really know where they come from. And as many of the people who have done this program knows, that you suddenly become much more aware of where your desires come from when you start exposing these unconscious processes that's present within us all. So he begins his idea with this simple statement that we all know is true, and that is humans are more imitative than any other creature. And they've done the scientific studies on this, even with newborn children. They've realized that these little babies who've just entered the world, who can barely see the face of their parents, are able to imitate facial expressions. In other words, if you pout your mouth or stick out your tongue, a baby can imitate that. How does this little creature, who has never even seen him or herself in a mirror, how does he know that that protruding mouth or that tongue equals his own mouth or tongue? And later on, neurologists have discovered something they call mirror neurons, that it seems to be hardwired into our capacity to recognize the intention and experience of others and reproduce it within ourselves without actually exerting the same energy. So there's a historical backing to mimetic theory. There's a biological, neurological backing to this capacity to imitate one another. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2, and I've got 3 chapters. So chapter 1, mimesis. We imitative creatures, and we imitate the desires of one another unconsciously more than anything else. Chapter 2 is when Girard started considering what role did this capacity play within the development of humanity. And why is this relevant to your life? Let me just throw this in. I think the history of humanity, from their birth through their early childhood development to their teenage development, I don't quite know where we are now, but the development of humankind in a way is replayed within every human's development. That whole history still has a memory within your biological existence. We carry that history in some way. And so this capacity to imitate, specifically imitate the desires of others, leads us to chapter 2, which I call scapegoating. Now, if you imagine early human societies, Gerard actually begins by imagining pre-humans, but I won't go there today. I'll just go to something that we all can maybe identify, and that is, let me give an example of children. If you have a child in a room filled with toys and a toddler, and he might not even pay specific attention to any one toy, if you put another child in the room, the first thing the second child will notice is the first child. And the second thing he will notice is the toy closest to that child. He will head over to that toy. And at that moment, the first child will realize that this is the toy he always wanted. And a little war breaks out. And that's a quick summary of human history. We don't know what we want. And we allow others and their desires to tell us what we want. And basically, James 3 is so accurate. Why are there conflicts and wars amongst you? It's because you desire, but your desire is not fulfilled. In other words, unfulfilled desire is at the heart of conflict. Now, obviously, when we find ourselves in conflict, we don't acknowledge that. What we acknowledged is, you provoked me, you did this, you did something wrong. Isn't that, or even whatever conflict you can think of now? The people involved in the conflict are not introspective. They are pointing fingers to whoever else have caused this conflict and provoked them and started it. But this is a very, I think, a very profound insight with not only within mimetic theory, but it echoes what the biblical writers understood. And that is that unfulfilled desire is the root cause of conflict. Even the 10 Commandments, you know, if we get to the end where he's kind of said everything you shouldn't do, you know, don't murder, don't, etc. And then he comes, don't desire your neighbor's donkey, don't desire your neighbor's house, don't desire, and I think he suddenly realized, you know what, I can go on and on telling you what not to desire. Let's get to the heart of all these issues. And that is, don't desire, don't covet whatever belongs to your neighbor. So he and that's where the 10 Commandments kind of stops. This is the root of all these other problems, is we allow our desires and our motivations to be shaped by our sense of inadequacy that recognizes in others the fullness that we think we lack in ourselves. And so we desire what they desire, thinking that that is going to fulfill us. Now, remember, all of this happens unconsciously. We are busy kind of exposing some of these unconscious processes. But what we are aware of is simply, I have a desire and somebody is standing in the way of me getting what I want. And that becomes an opportunity for conflict. Now, mimetic theory allows us to look below that and say, actually, that desire did not spontaneously erupt in you. It began in a sense of inadequacy that adopted the desire of somebody else, most likely the person that you perceive as the obstacle is most likely the person from whom you adopted your desire. and now you are both competing for the same object of desire. So that's that's the beginning of chapter 2, scapegoating. So within larger communities, when conflict erupts, early communities, what often happened is when they met, one community would annihilate the others. But all across the world, a solution presented itself. And that is, instead of everyone killing everyone, it's much more beneficial. And also this happened unconsciously. This wasn't a rational calculation. In the midst of conflict, when we desperately want a solution, if somebody can divert our attention from just our irrational rage and say, we have found the problem. It is this one, or this minority group, or this person. We are naturally seeking to find the source of our conflict. And the last place we want to look is within ourselves. So when somebody points us in the right direction and say, there's your problem, it is the easiest thing for a community to become united in their condemnation of a scapegoat. And so the scapegoating mechanism, which is at the root of every society and civilization, you can go and look at every civilization across the world, the origin myth will follow a structure. And that structure is there was chaos, or there was a monster of chaos that was about to consume our community. However, through a creative act of violence, the monster was slain, the chaos dissipated, and a new community was born. Girard recognizes that similar events gave birth to similar myths, and that the heart of every civilization is the grave of a scapegoat, is this way in which we can consummate all our frustrations, all our irritations, and project it onto one guilty party. And by having this cathartic release, there's a new peace that permeates through the whole community. And that symbol becomes so powerful because the scapegoat represents both the chaos and the new order, both the frustration and the release, both life and death. That symbol becomes so rich in meaning. In fact, it becomes so rich in meaning that some anthropologists think that it's the initial catalyst that gave birth to symbolic thought. Because what do you need for symbolic thought? You need a richness and a complexity of meaning within a symbol that exceeds just its simplistic forms. Let me explain. We can teach great apes. We can teach them many words. Some of them can learn up to 300 words or more, where you can say, yes, A-P-P-L-E, and the ape will know that refers to that fruit. There's some form of symbolic thinking, but what I mean by complex symbolic thinking is the kind of metaphoric way in which we understand our world. So I can tell you, you are the apple of my eye. And most of you will understand what is implied by that sentence. But that is what the great apes at this time, they don't know what you mean. They can relate the word apple to the fruit, but they can't relate the idea of you are the apple of my eye and interpret it to mean that just as an apple is delicious to behold, I love what I see in you. You know, that's something beyond the metaphorical grasp. So you need a symbol that is so rich in meaning that it becomes the catalyst for language, for symbolic thinking. And so many anthropologists think that is what we have in the scapegoat, because the scapegoat represents both death and life, both in and out, both order and chaos. All those symbols are concentrated in that very significant event that gives birth to our societies. So that, I think I've gone over my time, so I'm just going to go to chapter 3 quickly. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is scapegoating. Chapter 3 is conversion. And so Gerard, at some stage after seeing these initial things within literature and myths, won't go through the story, but he then began reading the Bible, and to his utter surprise, he found that the same mythical stories are present within scriptures, but the specific areas that myth tries to avoid, the Bible pauses and asks us to look at it more intensely. So the myths, they don't want you to consider whether the scapegoat is guilty or innocent. They unconsciously assume, of course, he's guilty. They unconsciously assume, of course, the community is innocent. Of course, God is on the side of the community, and he justified our violence against the offensive scapegoat. Those are all assumptions within the myths. But the biblical stories, although they follow the same pattern, they start asking questions about whether the scapegoat was really guilty, whether God was really on the side of the community. Maybe that is part of the reinterpretation of the flood story, because there were many flood myths and stories before the one that we have in the Bible. And maybe one of the most significant things that happens within the Bible's interpretation of the flood story is this question of, is God not maybe on the side of the outcast and the whole community is wrong? Is God not maybe on the side of the victim? There's many other messages in the story, but that's a central diversion from the myths that was popular in their time, where God was with the community and just justifying their violence, and the outcasts deserved what they get. Here, everything's reversed. The whole community dies and the outcast survives, and God's on the side of the outcast. So that was chapter 2. Chapter 3, as I started now, the conversion he found within the biblical stories, the struggle with ideas that were implanted within human consciousness. What were those ideas? That God is on our side, he justifies our violence. Sometimes he gets very upset and somebody needs to die, and we are his willing servants to execute his judgment on the guilty. All of those ideas are exposed within the life and message of Jesus. Jesus comes and he says, I'm gonna show you things hidden from the foundation of the world. And the people he argue with, they offended by the fact of what he implies, that they don't know what they're doing. And they say, listen, for instance, when he says, you are of your father, the devil, he was a murderer from the beginning, etc. They said, that's not our father. No, yes, our forefathers killed people, but we wouldn't have done it. And he said, no, you are at the moment walking over the graves of those and whitewashing the graves of those your forefathers killed. And then he makes this amazing statement, which I always find amusing, as to how are we going to fit this into our theology? Because he basically says, my death is not going to be unique. The events around my death are actually not that unique. In fact, it has happened throughout human history. But you have killed your prophets and you have killed those who have been sent to you. But what makes that event unique is not the sequence of events and the death itself, but his interpretation of what happens there. And it's in that context that he says, I'm going to reveal to you things hidden from the foundation of the world. The same process is going to happen again. The community is going to become united in their condemnation of an individual. You're going to again believe that God is on your side, that God demands the death of this undoubtedly guilty scapegoat. But this is the event in which Jesus then overturns that initial symbol. Think how significant this is. If this was the symbol, if the body of the scapegoat is the very symbol that was the catalyst for human consciousness, for symbolic thinking, for the way in which we make meaning, the way in which we tell stories, was influenced by this event that justified violence. Think how significant the death and resurrection of Jesus is, where he brings us back to that initial event, and he says, there's a few things you misinterpreted, and I'm going to help you reinterpret that. And what is the effect of that? The whole way in which we think, our metaphors, our symbolic, our language changes. The way in which we create the meaning changes when we reinterpret that original symbol. And this time, the symbol of Christ upon that cross, he brings us face to face with the fact that our scapegoat is not guilty, but innocent. Now that has huge implications, because if our scapegoat's innocent, then God's not the one who justified our violence. Now our whole understanding of who God is changes when we recognize that our scapegoat is a victim, not a sacrifice. When we recognize that, we suddenly realize that we weren't just the chosen instruments of a wrathful God to execute his violence. But if the scapegoat is innocent and God did not justify this violence, then suddenly we need to look at ourselves more honestly than what we have ever before. And obviously the story continues. Jesus says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. He reveals a God who is more interested in forgiveness than in getting even. So that is very quickly a summary of mimetic theory and what we are going to be doing for the next 6 months. And we've got so much more to say, but I'm sorry I took so much time already. Let's throw it open to conversation, because I just realized we have another call at 11. anyone wants to comment or ask a question, you are welcome.
You could just go to the bottom to the little reaction section and just pop a little hand up, or physically put your hand up in it so we can see you. Lut. And
I have a question here. On February 25, the Philippines celebrates 37 years of the once famous People Power Revolution. And that was the time when the 21 years of the reign of the former President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. ended, when the people rallied on the main highway of Metro Manila and all over the country, that ended in Marcos Sr. Being exiled to Hawaii, where he later died. It happened in February 23 to 25, a 3-day bloodless People Power Revolution in 1986. And that is one example of what I mentioned in my responses in the last 2 lessons, that instead of a scapegoat, the marginalized person, where the crowd focuses the anger and executes the weak scapegoat and then achieves peace and unity of the community. That incident is one example of what I've been mentioning as the scapebull. And so my question is there a possibility that instead of killing an innocent, weak victim, that somehow the trend of the outflow of the anger, frustration of the crowd be channeled to the root of the problem, the injustice and the violence anyway? Who I coined the term the scapebull or the scapebull.
Yeah.
Because that incident brought about 37 years of the restoration of democracy in the Philippines.
Yes.
Now, you heard in the last elections, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. won 58% of the vote. So his son of the former dictator is now the current president.
Yeah.
The Philippines is still at peace. It was a majority election. So this concept of the possibility of shifting focus to the scapegoat.
Yes, very good question, Lut. And maybe, so throughout history, our scapegoats, I think very few of them were innocent. I think they are innocent of what we accuse them of. So I think because all the scapegoats were human, most of them had real problems, real issues. They were guilty of something. But what happens within the scapegoating process is that we project onto them the frustrations, the guilt, the conflict that we have within ourselves that often far exceeds the things that they are actually guilty of. So I don't doubt that there are scapegoats that are guilty. I don't doubt that there are people that have, especially when in power, that have done many things wrong. In fact, if you read some of the people who have developed the anthropological story on the scapegoating, they think that is where the first kings arose from. Because the community found that it's so beneficial to have a scapegoat, they would every now and then, and the scapegoat brought about such peace to the community, they would honor the scapegoat after his death as a deity, because somehow this person's death brought about peace. And so when chaos happened again, they would select another scapegoat and they would treat that scapegoat with absolute respect and honor, although they know they're going to kill him. But one of those clever scapegoats started having visions because they revered the scapegoat as divine. One of those clever scapegoats started having visions where God told him that what would solve this problem this time was not killing him, but somebody else. And he became this divine communicator between the divine realm and the people. And so it's quite possible that the whole system of priesthood and kingdom kind of building began within this scapegoating process. So that's a partial answer to your question. Doesn't answer the whole thing, but I think what we can safely say is that scapegoats, human scapegoats, are often guilty of something. What makes them a scapegoat is when we project our own frustration onto them beyond their own wrongdoings and faults. That makes sense.
Anyone else?
Hey.
Sharon, Mark.
Hi. Do you think that, like now, when you look at your newborn grandson, does he have to go through this whole process?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is there a way to, because I see that with my own grandchild now. I can see things in her that make her so unique, but my son and daughter-in-law are raising her the best of their ability and already putting labels and, you know, and that's a tough thing to handle once you start knowing this, because daily I am now turning things over in my own life, making new meaning and new, you know, to my story. And I've realized how much, like when you talk about guilt of the scapegoat, how guilty I am and how much guilt I put on myself. And that's all because of what other people have labeled me as. We all have to go through this, do you think? Or is it like, can there someday be a way?
Such a profound question. I think all of these things, obviously, we want to learn from them. One of the things that I think is essential, that I think is practical in how we can raise children or our grandchildren, is that if at the heart of this scapegoating process, there is this sense of lack, of the sense of inadequacy, and that is something that is very natural to develop in a little child who's smaller than all his siblings, than everyone around him. It's easy to feel inadequate. I can't do what the older people are doing. I'm not allowed to go where the older people are going. So that sense of lack, I think, is very easy to become part of when you are small and vulnerable. So I think one thing one can do is to instill a sense of value and meaning, and a sense of growth is natural. You don't need to perform at the level that you've not grown up to yet. I think some of the processes are inevitable and is part of what makes us human. The process of struggling with how to express your internal frustrations. I think there's going to be a natural progression where you just blame it on others, and to then learn to actually realize that maybe there's things in me that can change, and it's not just my world that's going to change. I think those processes are natural, but certainly I think we can, these insights and the life of Jesus, who found in God a sense, and in that relationship, a sense of fullness and completeness, can be such a model to say we don't have to go to the extreme of the conflict that twisted desire causes. We can engage in this process to an extent that is healthy, and that doesn't mean that it's either or. I think the mimetic process is part of what makes us human, and we're all going to grow into greater consciousness of it. But it does mean that we can maybe avoid the more extreme consequences of violence, etc., and grow in a more loving way.
And I think that whole aspect of the lack of being, the sense of lack of being, it's so central when children are being raised. I think of now our little grandson and his mum, who, in those initial stages, there's all sorts of things they have to go through of learning, all the questions that go through their head. Am I giving enough milk? Am I doing this right? Am I, and then looking at this cloud of people around them who, there are many, many willing people to give advice and tell them how they did it and how it should be done. And that can often leave a sense of lack in the parent, thinking, I want to do this right. And just that reminder that you are made for this. You are made for this wholeness. You come from wholeness. And your separate expression is this beautiful gift to the world and to one another of the reflection of this wholeness, the reflection of God. And if we as parents can return to that sense of belonging and wholeness in ourselves and take the beautiful advice and learn and glean from it, because it's all wonderful and it's all part of community, but take it and settle it right inside of ourselves and say, I am enough for this moment. This moment has never happened before. This particular set of events I'm made for, and I have within me all that I need to be that reflection. And
that's beautiful. It just permeates into everything. Thank you.
Carolyn.
Well, just this past week, I've experienced something with one of my sisters-in-law. Been kind of holding some things against her for the past few years because of the way I feel she's treated my brother, and so my attitude has calmed down a little bit toward her, but she said some things that and I saw some things in visiting with them just this week that it just angered me all over again. And it's like, I'm going to tell the rest of my siblings. And then it occurred to me, that was a form of exacting violence toward her. And I know a lot of it is because of my own sense of being and fullness. And so that is the only thing that has held my tongue, because it has occurred to me that I would, that in itself to me was my own form of violence in going and, disparaging her and talking about her and all that. And it just kind of hit me in the face. What was going on. And anyway, I just wanted to share that. It was very enlightening to me.
Yes. That's amazing, Carolyn.
Thank you, Carolyn.
It's those kind of insights that sometimes hits you from a side that you haven't expected, and opens up a new possibility of relating and relationship that can cause transformation way beyond what we've imagined. Shall I quickly go on to the other meeting, or do you want to? And then we'll finish this one first.
Let's give it 5 minutes.
Okay.
It's going to be late.
Sarah.
I just wanted to go back to what you were saying there at the beginning about the Girardian view kind of offering the larger meta-narrative for the way that we're looking at the Bible. And so for me, the honesty of knowing that we actually are using a Girardian lens is helpful, because I come from the lens of either inerrancy or even Christology, where it's kind of a denial that there are other influences, maybe from like Plato or like the different philosophers and things that where it's just it's not a full enough. There's just too many blindnesses there in not realizing that a lens is being used. And so I just wanted to say that how helpful that is, just the honesty of it, of knowing that, yes, this is a working theory that we're using to apply. And some of these other theories that we've used have already in the past have been disproven. And people are still wanting to use them to apply meaning and that kind of thing. And then the second thing I wanted to add in line with that is a very helpful book that I read recently, especially for people coming out of evangelicalism, is Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Kobes-Dumez. And who also, I like, it's a zoomed out perspective on evangelical history and the way that certain like patriarchy was formed, and just different things like that allow you to see the influences kind of in a similar way to what we're doing with Girard's stuff. So yeah, just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Sarah. That's so useful. Vera.
Thank you. Do we have time though?
We've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Okay. I'm just really excited about the original idea of starting house groups, and that spurred this whole group of the whole. And so I'm just trying to get a little more practical here. If anyone had started such a group, and if so or not, my main question is like where to start, what topic to start with, because even here as we are talking, I mean, we all realize that this is such a huge topic, and so I'm just curious.
Very good question.
And at the same time, can I just share a little bit of inspiration we are getting in? I mean, we had this camp in Hungary with Andre and Marianne, and a Hungarian guy heard about it and he liked the idea of retreat. And so he started like weekend retreats every month. He gathers folks together, and I have been going, and this was our 4th weekend. I just got back an hour ago. So it's happening, but it's a 3-day event, and we eat together and live together and just have lots of conversations, obviously, and just hiking and doing outdoor stuff. So it's nice, but it's a very different format. So like when you have to be focused and you just have, a weekly group for an hour, it is different. So I'm curious.
We still remember our amazing time with you and everyone there. And so I don't think any groups have started. Maybe some people have groups. So my advice would be just jump in and flow with it. So invite everybody that you want to be part of your weekly fellowship to join this Zoom session every 2 weeks. and whether, you know, whether they're ready for what's here or not, that's all part of the wonderful journey of life. There's many things we're not ready for, and it happens in any case. And then the next week you have opportunity to converse through it. So there's no, it's very unstructured in that way, that it's not a specific program for those fellowships. And it's designed that way because every group is going to be at a different place.
And every group, the group you get together will be as unique as you are.
Yeah.
And that's really how it should be.
So this, we purpose for this to simply be a catalyst for conversation in your own group. Beyond that, obviously, we are personally available for, if you've started a group or have questions, to just contact us, and we'll be there to support you as well in that way.
And we encourage as well everyone, if you are starting and you know, a group, or there are things that you found helpful, just, you know, pop us a message and we'll make sure we share it with everyone as well.
I'm sorry we've got to say goodbye so quickly today, but we've got another fellowship that's waiting for us. We're speaking at their fellowship this morning. Love you all. It was wonderful to see your faces, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye-bye.